right here we have the MP5, not in 9mm, but in what?
10mm.
Which is 1mm better than 9. I mean, we know millimeters matter. So in all reality, the 10mm delivers almost twice the kinetic energy as a 9mm, favored by the FBI for a long time, but proven to be a little bit too powerful for their weak-fed hands. But in a submachine gun, a pretty incredible, very effective weapon. So you might think that changing an MP5 from 9mm to 10mm might just be simple. Maybe it's just a little bit of a beefier receiver, a slightly larger caliber barrel, but in fact, many upgrades were made to the MP5 in total to come up with the MP5-10. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about this faithful reproduction by Dakota Tactical, perhaps the best MP5 makers, twin roller blade makers in the world. Micah, would you tend to agree?
I don't even know who they are.
Dakota Tactical, they're awesome. But before we get into it, we have to thank the biggest sponsor of the channel, who is who, Micah?
Primary Arms, providing you with any optics you might need to fit your 10mm MP5.
Or
Skittles,
anything else.
Kit Kat bars, all that.
We love them. Anything that you could possibly want, you can find on their site, from optics to much, much more. They support it. They keep the channel free. Go and check them out. Tell them how much you love them. Is that correct? And guys, of course, we cannot forget Night Vision Network. Whether you're looking to buy night vision, whether you're looking to rent night vision for a cozy outing for airsofting with the boys, they have great customer service. We love them. And in fact, if you use discount code GRANTHUMB, $75 off. Go and check them out. And if you want to get better at shooting, dry fire. Best way to do it, Mantis. Mantis has a great dry fire system, turns your gun into a dry fire machine. We love them. My employees have stolen all of my Mantis tech, and it's going to make you a better shooter. So go and check them out. And of course, AAC for sponsoring the ammo. But we have to give a big thank you to Last Shot Arizona for sponsoring the 10mm for this particular video. You can buy tons of different ammo types in them. A big thank you to Last Shot Arizona. So right here we have the 9mm MP5 and we have the 10mm MP5. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the controllability difference between the two of these weapons. The MP5 and 9, very, very impressive ability to keep the gun on target. We'll compare the two groups and see how they stack up. All right, we're at 7 yards. First up, we have the MP5 in 9mm. As you can see, last round, there's no bolt hold open feature. That is how a typical MP5 runs. You can see the group from the MP5. It's a very easy weapon to control. That is part of the reason why it is still being used by many countries today, even by the United States. Let's try the 10mm.
Okay.
Next up, we have the 10mm. It should be noted, nearly twice the kinetic energy. Let's go and try it out. Bolt hold open, that is a feature on the MP5 10mm. So when you do a reload, you simply put your next mag in, hit that bolt release. Pretty cool. Okay, here's the 10mm group. I just shoot out the center. Pretty similar to the 9mm. Here's another 10 group we did just a little bit earlier. We had one malfunction on it. The 10mm is very, very controllable. I will say, Mike, you shot it too, but the 10mm does jump a little bit more. It's barely anything though.
I want to say, I think the reason you could get either a smaller group or the same is because the rate of fire allows you to get back on target.
I agree. It's a little bit slower than the MP5 and 9. But the thing you have to realize too is there's a lot more power behind the 10. So I think the trade-off is definitely worth it. And I find it to be a very controllable weapon. Next up, we'll show reloads between the MP5 and 10, the MP5 and 9. First up, we have the MP5 10mm. 1 round 1 reload comparing the MP5 10 to the 9. So what's nice about the MP5 and 10 is that I don't have to lock the bolt back or anything like that because there's a bolt hold open. So once I go to the reload, I can simply mag out, mag in, hit the bolt release right there. Okay, MP5 9, ready? Reload. I'm sure there's going to be a few questions about the MP5 Reload, and this is a pretty nuanced topic. But let's talk about it for a moment. So a lot of the questions are going to be, there's no bolt hold open on the MP5 9mm when you fire to the last round. It just simply goes forward, get a click. So why don't I just pull the old mag out, put a new mag in, and cycle the weapon? Well, it can be done. So if you have a magazine that's downloaded to 28 rounds, that works fine, or very worn in mags at 29. And in fact, many military teams, that was the SOP. They would download their magazines. So what's going to happen is if you have a full 30-round magazine and you attempt to insert it on a closed bolt like we have right here, what happens is with those rounds, it doesn't allow the magazine to seat well. Because of that, it pushes on the feed lips or it'll push on the bolt carrier. It could damage either. And you'll eventually get in an operative gun or in an operative magazine, and you could run into a pretty serious issue during a gunfight or some type of situation where your life is dependent on the weapon. Because of that, the typical reload procedure on the MP5, assuming that you're using a 30-round magazine, has always been to, once you fire that last round, you're going to take the bolt, you're going to lock it to the rear, you're going to pull that old magazine out, you're going to put the fresh magazine in with that bolt back, then you're going to slap it or release that charging handle to load it, and then you're back in the fight. The reason is repeatability and consistency. The reason a lot of military teams still do that reload technique is they're not sure if a buddy loaded 28, 29, or 30, and I tend to agree. So on my reloads, I do what's most consistent, which is lock the bolt back, mag out, fresh mag in, and then release it and back in. Plus it looks cool. With a bolt hold open mechanism like you have on the MP5 and 10mm, it's a much faster procedure because that bolt is already held to the rear. Therefore, getting that fresh mag in there is much faster. It's a much more efficient and a much more modern reloading technique. And frankly, one that I wish was implemented on the MP5 9mm. I'm sure there's an engineering reason why this mechanism can't be incorporated into that, the smaller MP5 and 9. But man, do I wish it had it. Now here in Grand Thumb, we don't talk too much about history, but the MP5 10mm originally came about from a request from law enforcement, specifically the FBI. And if you know anything about the FBI in the 80s and the 90s, man, did they love 10mm, and they were a big fan of double tap. So in fact, the 10mm that they got from HK back in those days had a 2-round burst option. Now we don't have that option because, well, you can do a 2-round burst with an auto trigger, but I'll show you how that would look from the FBI. So they enjoyed the 2-round burst because they believe that those two 10mm rounds impacting at roughly the same area was quite devastating. I tend to agree. I also believe that a just auto burst will do the same thing. So how that will look with the FBI gun. And it is very effective. It is very simple to control. So I understand on less trained shooters why it would work, but as you can see with a full auto trigger, it's just as simple to do 2-round bursts. Plus, if you want to do longer bursts, it works just as good. So we've done a lot of shooting with the MP5 and 10mm. There are definitely some quirks to the 10mm and a lot of really cool design features. So let's go ahead and let's get this down on the table. Let's talk about it. Let's go from there. Now, a big thank you to Henry Repeating Arms for sponsoring this video. Now, Henry Repeating Arms make over 200 different firearm models, and they're all backed by a 100% warranty as well as a satisfaction guarantee. Looks like I'm out. They make a ton of different rifles in a ton of different calibers, from 45-70 all the way down to these little 22 guys right here. I love them, I teach my kids on them, and I shoot them quite a bit for fun. And you might know them for rifles, but in fact they make rifles, shotguns, revolvers, and here's the thing. Henry Repeating Arms are made in America or not made at all. Go and check it out. They have tons of cool things in the pipeline. Go and check out their catalog. Oh! Yes! Yeah! So we've done a lot of shooting. Let's do a lot of talking now because there's a lot of very interesting notes to be made about the MP5 in 10mm, especially when compared to the smaller cousin of it, the 9mm. So This came about specifically for the FBI, but despite that, it's been used by many different agencies and many different militaries worldwide. Not the most successful MP5 variant, but I would say a very good one. There are definitely some quirks about the 10mm MP5, especially ones that are made within the US for some pretty interesting reasons. But let's go ahead, let's do what we always do. We're gonna go tip to butt down this whole guy. We're gonna compare it directly to the MP5 in 9mm and talk about some of the oddities about the 10mm MP5. This particular one was built by Dakota Tactical, which I do believe is one of the premier roller delayed builders out there, and about as close as you can get to the HK quality without paying, you know, $50,000. So this is a lot more affordable. But let's go ahead, let's break this down. So first off, when it comes to your 10mm variants, it is the same suppressor lockup, just larger, just like we have on the 9mm. We have both a thread protector to thread on a suppressor, as well as a tri-lug. Now, in practice, the only suppressors that I have seen that have been used on the 10mm MP5s were thread-on suppressors, and even then, there were definitely issues that were seen with the 10mm suppressor on these. I haven't seen them used that often. We opted not to, simply because on roller delayed weapons, the locking piece that operates the weapon, so it's going to have a degree that's going to mandate how much force it resists before that weapon unlocks, needs to be changed when a suppressor is added. This is true of the 9mm as well, but you have to imagine 10mm is a lot more powerful, and because of that, you need to be a little bit more careful on how you're running those different locking pieces and making sure that you're changing those out. For simplicity's sake for this video, we opted to run this guy unsuppressed. Also, I need to watch my lead levels. So we have that for mounting any type of suppressor, and then of course we do have the classic 4-end grip light on this guy. I just love the look of the classic MP5 with the A3 stock and the light. I think it is probably the coolest and most iconic MP5 setup. Micah, do you tend to agree?
I think that full stock with that handguard is possibly, yeah, the most classic.
Sexiest, you have to say. Now, when it comes to barrels, obviously this is chambered in 10mm. What's very interesting about this MP5 variant is that if you know anything about 10mm, you know that 40 caliber or 40 Smith & Wesson is actually just 10mm shortened a little bit. A lot of people like to refer to the 40 SW as the 40 shortened weak or the 10mm shortened weak, which is hilarious because the FBI tried to run 10mm as its main service handgun caliber, but the recoil proved to be too excessive, and so they actually moved down to a 40. That's a little bit of history right there. And how's the 40 doing nowadays, Micah?
Not the person. Oh, the 40.
Yeah, 40.
The 40.
Yeah.
That's how it's doing.
Not well. That's going to anger some people. So moving back from there, there's a couple interesting notes where the MP5 10mm begins to diverge from your typical MP5 variant. And that's particularly in the pins that are holding the different furniture pieces in place. So let's take a look at those right here. Mike, if you'll come in a little bit closer. So as you can see, these pins also double as sling attachment points. And in addition to that, you'll notice that we have a nut on the other side that threads into place to ensure that when you do have a sling attached to these points that you can't pull those pins out. In addition, this prevents any type of recoil from getting those shaken loose. This is also true of the back piece right here, and they can be switched to either side to configure that sling however you want. I think that's a very cool thing that you can do on the MP5 10mm, and it's a small little kind of upgrade that was made to the platform overall. Moving back, we do have a typical charging handle on the MP5 10mm, but you'll notice we have it on an empty magazine right now. And if I lock that back, just like on a normal MP5, I can pull it all the way back, push it up, and, you know, put in a fresh mag or whatever, or in this case, if I have an empty mag, if I hit that down, you notice it doesn't do anything. The bolt doesn't go forward. The reason for that is we do have an empty magazine right here. That means it's on the catch. So the bolt hold open is working as it should. So if I actually want to drop that bolt, I have to hit that bolt hold open. So in reality, you actually don't have to operate the charging handle, if at all, maybe for administrative reload procedures, but other than that, once the gun is running, you can simply go off that bolt release just like you would with an AR-15. It's a very cool upgrade. As you can see, it's a very simplistic system. the little piece is added right here that catches onto the follower on the magazine that allows that bolt hold open to work. It's fairly simplistic. I don't know, and I'm not the guy to ask why this has not been added to the MP5 and 9mm. That is a James Williamson question. That is an HK question. But I think it's a upgrade that, if done to the 9mm MP5, would make it not infinitely better, but would make it a much more modern platform. Next thing we're going to take a look at is going to be the magazines. So the magazines are quite large because they have to accommodate either 10mm, 357, or 40. So these also fit 357, which is kind of cool. But you'll notice they look fairly similar to the UMP magazine, and indeed there is many precursors in the design for the MP510 going over to the UMP in 40 and the UMP in 45. And in addition, compared to the MP5, you can obviously see that they opted to go for a polymer magazine as opposed to a stamped metal magazine. So these are original HK mags right here. These do tend to work the best. There are different magazines that have been produced aftermarket. I've had very poor luck with them, and I've had the best luck with these kind of semi-translucent HK produced magazines. They were typically gray in color. A lot of the earlier ones are a little more clear and amber in color. And what's very interesting about this is that, weird little note, but many of the US produced MP5 and 10mm, the flat that is used to make the MP5 and 10mm, the angle of the magazine is just barely off. It's just not quite right. Because of that, these guns require a little bit of a break-in on the magazines to kind of take off a little bit of material. So some people would actually shave a little bit of material down, but once the gun breaks in on the magazines, they're fine, but they're not quite where they should be. And there's always that little bit of problem. There's different ways to compensate for that, and every company does it a little bit differently. I'll let those different companies kind of talk about how they figure that out. But Dakota just keeps it the way it is, lets the gun run in on the magazines. Sometimes, from time to time, we still do have a problem with that very last round on the 10mm, and that's just par for the course. A little bit of a quirk because of a flaw in the flat piece that is used to make this particular MP5 and 10mm. Now, sighting on the MP510, just like your typical MP5, you have a hooded front sight, and then you have the very awesome drum rear sight. And in this case, we do also have a Picatinny rail added. These are not standard on the 10mm MP5s, however, it makes it a lot nicer to have some type of rail on here. We have an EOTech on here, makes it a very easy, very effective gun to shoot. And moving down to the controls are your typical MP5 controls. There's no magazine release button, so if you take a look at the MP5, there is an optional to use a magazine release. Nobody really uses it because nobody has monster hands, so there's only a paddle release on the 10mm. In addition to that, a lot of the lowers for the 10mm did have different markings. We opted for an SEF on ours, but again, most of those trigger packs on the 10mm did have a burst feature. Other than that, there's not a whole lot of difference that comes into play operationally for a guy using one of these. It's your typical MP5 controls. So if we go ahead and load this guy, we try out the trigger right here. Put your finger right over mine. I'm gonna get that sling out of the way. So just a little bit of play, and you have that typical MP5 roll off, and it's auto, so the trigger releases automatically. So it's a little bit of play, roll off, about 7 pounds, off the reset, maybe 5. MP5 triggers are nice, and semi-auto they are slow. That is probably the only problem with them, but that being said, if there's any type of pistol caliber carbine that you'd want, a 10mm makes a little bit more sense power-wise to me, as far as a semi-auto would go. Moving back from there, we do have our stock. This is a typical A3 stock. They do have to be tuned up a little bit to work on your typical 10mm. This isn't something where you can simply slap the 9mm to the 10mm. You need some different buffers in there to make sure that everything is balanced correctly. The biggest thing for me when it comes to the MP5 and 10mm is you have a slightly slower firing weapon, firing a much more powerful cartridge, but in my mind, just as controllable as the MP5. Me and Micah were just talking about this earlier, but fire rate definitely does come down to it. But if you consider something like the UMP 45, which I consider to be a very poor weapon as far as controllability goes, and also has a very, very slow cyclic rate, you have to consider how good of a job the roller system does do with the 10mm. It's very smooth to fire, it's very powerful to fire, and I've been a big fan of the MP5 and 10mm. The one thing that we do have to note is that there is a price. The price is that these weapons don't last nearly as long as the MP5 and 9mm, and the reason for that is there's a lot more powder, there's a lot more heat, there's a lot more wear that is occurring on these guns. They're going to break sooner, and there's just going to be more issues and more maintenance and more parts that are needed, and these parts aren't exactly cheap, nor are they exactly plentiful. So as good as the 10mm is, you have to understand there's always going to be a trade-off somewhere. I love shooting this guy, but we ran 14 mags back to back, and we began to have some issues with reset due to how hot the gun was getting, because that 10mm does produce an insane amount of heat. So when it comes to choosing what type of MP5 variant you want, I would say for the most part, the 9mm makes a lot more sense in terms of ammunition costs, being able to service it, making sure that it's running for a long time. However, I can definitely see the appeal behind the 10mm simply because of the amount of power that it delivers in a very small, very compact package. It really isn't that much larger of a receiver, as you can see, compared to the typical MP5. It's just a little bit stouter.
What is it? Is it heavier?
A little bit, by about a quarter to a half pound. And of course, the magazines are much larger, so it's much harder to stack these. With an MP5, with 2 magazines, you can actually stack them both within within a 5.5, well, most 5.56 pouches can hold 2 of these mags. So you can actually hold quite a few MP5 mags compared to the 10mm mags, which suffer the same problem that the UMP mags have, which is that they're long, they're fat, and they don't really fit anything that well. Guys, thank you so much for watching. We appreciate you guys tuning in. Tons more good stuff always coming out. And as always, train, train, train. That's what's going to matter. I'm going to be way more scared of a guy with a 9mm MP5 who trains all day than a guy who never picks up his 10mm MP5. Final thing for you guys is going to be dad advice, and that is going to be with our ranch hand.
Praise God.
Nice.